The coffee mug trembled in my hands as I stood in the kitchen, watching the snow fall silently outside our Connecticut home. Christmas morning 2023, what should have been a day of joy and family togetherness, was about to become the most painful conversation of my life. I could hear footsteps upstairs, the familiar creak of the floorboards in Jake's room. My 22-year-old son would be down soon, and I knew exactly what was coming. We'd been dancing around this moment for months, maybe even years, but today it would all come to a head. The Christmas tree stood in the living room, its lights twinkling mockingly at the few presents scattered beneath. Most years by this time the floor would be covered in wrapping paper, the air filled with laughter, and the smell of my wife Sarah's famous cinnamon rolls. But Sarah had been gone for 3 years now, and Jake blamed me for everything. I heard his bedroom door slam, then his heavy footsteps on the stairs. My heart rate quickened. I'd been dreading this moment, but I also knew it was necessary. In my pocket I fingered the small wrapped box that contained something Jake didn't know existed, something that would either save our relationship or destroy it completely. "Morning, Dad." His voice was flat, emotionless as he walked into the kitchen. Jake looked exactly like Sarah. Same dark hair, same piercing green eyes that could see right through you. But where Sarah's eyes had always held warmth, Jake's held only resentment. "Merry Christmas, son." I tried to keep my voice steady, normal. "I made your favorite, blueberry pancakes." He barely glanced at the plate I'd prepared. "Thanks, but I'm not really hungry." We stood there in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Outside I could see the Hendersons next door already opening presents with their grandkids, their laughter drifting through the windows like a cruel reminder of what we'd lost. "Jake, I thought maybe we could—" "Don't." He held up his hand, stopping me mid-sentence. "Just don't, Dad. I know what you're going to say, and I'm not in the mood for your speeches today." I watched him pour himself a cup of coffee, his movements sharp and angry. This wasn't the little boy who used to wake me up at 5 a.m. on Christmas morning, bouncing on my bed with excitement. This wasn't the teenager who helped me surprise his mother with a new wedding ring on their 15th anniversary. This was a young man carrying so much pain that it radiated off him like heat from a furnace. "I got you something," I said quietly, pulling the small box from my pocket. Jake didn't even look up from his coffee. "Save it. I told you weeks ago. Don't expect a gift from me this year. You don't deserve one." The words hit me like physical blows, but I'd been expecting them. Jake had made his feelings clear over the past few months, ever since he'd found out about the secret I'd been keeping, the secret about his mother's final days. "Jake, please, just look at me." Finally, reluctantly, he raised his eyes to meet mine. The pain there was overwhelming, but underneath it, I could still see traces of the love we'd once shared. It gave me hope. "I know you hate me right now," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know you think I failed your mother, that I failed you, and maybe you're right about some of it. Dad, no, let me finish, please." I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything between us. "There are things you don't know. Things your mother made me promise never to tell you. But I can't carry this anymore, Jake. I can't watch you hate me for something you don't fully understand." Jake set his coffee mug down, hard on the counter. "What are you talking about?" I held out the small wrapped box. "This was your mother's. She gave it to me 3 days before she died, with very specific instructions about when to give it to you." For the first time that morning, Jake looked truly uncertain. His anger wavered, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "What instructions?" "She said to give it to you the day you told me I didn't deserve your love anymore. She said you'd know what it meant when you were ready to hear the whole truth." Jake stared at the box like it might bite him. "I don't want it. I know. But your mother knew this day would come. She knew that someday you'd find out about the decisions we made together, and she knew you'd blame me for all of it." Tears were starting to blur my vision, but I pressed on. "She also knew that you'd need to understand why we did what we did." "Stop talking in riddles, Dad. If you have something to say, just say it." I set the box on the kitchen island between us. "Your mother didn't die from cancer, Jake. Not the way you think she did." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's face went white, then red, then white again. "What do you mean?" "The cancer was terminal, yes, but in the end she chose when to go, and she asked me to help her." Jake stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "You're lying." "I wish I was." The tears were flowing freely now, 3 years of guilt and grief pouring out of me. "She was in so much pain, son. So much pain that the morphine wasn't even touching anymore. The doctor said she had maybe 2 weeks left, maybe less, and every day would be worse than the last." "So you killed her?" Jake's voice cracked on the last word. She begged me, Jake. She begged me not to let her suffer anymore. She said she wanted to die with dignity, while she could still tell you she loved you, while she could still hold your hand and mean it. Jake slammed his fist on the counter, making the coffee mugs jump. You had no right to make that decision. It wasn't my decision, I shouted back, my own composure finally breaking. It was hers. She planned everything, Jake, everything. She wrote letters, made videos, arranged for her doctor in Oregon to help us. She spent her last month making sure you'd be okay without her. Oregon? Jake's voice was barely a whisper. I nodded, wiping my eyes with my sleeve. We drove there together, the three of us. Remember that vacation we took? You thought we were just visiting the coast one last time. But your mother, she knew it would be her last time seeing the ocean. She knew it would be her last time watching you skip stones on the beach. Jake sank onto one of the kitchen stools, his face buried in his hands. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think? Because she made me promise. She said you were too young to carry that burden, that it would destroy you to know you'd been part of her final plan. She wanted you to remember her fighting, not giving up. But I found out anyway, Jake said, his voice muffled by his hands. I found the medical records, the receipts from the hotel in Portland. I thought you'd taken her there to die alone, that you'd abandoned her when she needed you most. My heart broke all over again hearing the pain in his voice. Oh, Jake, son, no. I never left her side, not for a minute. I held her hand while she drank the medication. I told her how much we both loved her. And she was peaceful, Jake. For the first time in months, she was peaceful. Jake looked up at me then, his eyes red with tears. She really chose it? She really chose it. And she chose the timing and the place and who would be there. The only thing she didn't choose was whether to tell you the truth. That she left up to me. I pushed the small box closer to him across the island. This will explain everything better than I ever could. She recorded it for you, Jake, for this exact moment. Jake stared at the box for a long time, his breathing shaky and uneven. Finally, with trembling fingers, he unwrapped it. Inside was a small digital recorder, the kind his mother used to use for work, and a folded piece of paper. He unfolded the paper first. I couldn't see what it said, but I watched Jake's face transform as he read it. The anger melted away, replaced by a grief so profound it made my chest ache. She knew, he whispered. She knew I'd hate you for it. She knew you'd need someone to blame. And she knew I'd rather have you hate me than hate her memory. Jake picked up the recorder with shaking hands. Have you listened to this? I shook my head. That's for you, son. Just for you. If you've ever held anger in your heart that later turned to understanding, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Sometimes the truth changes everything. Jake pressed play, and his mother's voice filled our kitchen for the first time in 3 years. I couldn't hear the words. She'd recorded it quietly, meant only for his ears, but I could see the impact on his face. He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his cheeks, and for the first time in months he looked like my little boy again. When the recording ended, Jake set the device down carefully and looked at me with eyes that held something I hadn't seen in so long. I'd almost forgotten what it looked like. Forgiveness. Dad, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And for the first time since his mother's death, my son and I cried together. The silence after our tears felt different than the hostile quiet that had filled our house for months. Jake sat at the kitchen island, turning the small recorder over in his hands like it was made of something precious and fragile. I watched him, afraid to break whatever spell his mother's voice had cast, afraid that speaking might shatter this moment of peace between us. She sounded so calm, Jake finally whispered, his voice hoarse from crying. On the recording, like she wasn't scared at all. I poured myself another cup of coffee, my hands steadier now than they'd been all morning. Your mother was never scared of death, Jake. She was scared of pain, scared of becoming someone she wasn't, but never of dying itself. Jake looked up at me, and I could see him processing everything, not just what he'd learned this morning, but months of anger and resentment that now had nowhere to go. She said in the recording that you didn't want to do it, that you fought her on it. I did. I sat down across from him, finally able to meet his eyes without flinching. For weeks I begged her to try another treatment, to give the doctors more time. I would have carried her through hell if it meant keeping her with us another day. But she convinced you. She wore me down, more like it. A sad smile crossed my face as I remembered those final conversations. Oh, you know how your mother was when she made up her mind about something. Remember when she decided she wanted to learn to surf at 45? Jake's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. She spent 3 months researching surfboards and wetsuits before she even saw the ocean. And she made me drive her to the beach every Saturday morning at dawn for 6 months, until she could stand up on that board for more than 10 seconds. She was so proud when she finally rode that wave all the way to shore. Jake's expression softened at the memory. She made you record it on your phone like 50 times. I still have those videos. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through old files I couldn't bear to look at for the past 3 years. Here, I turned the screen toward Jake, and there she was. Sarah in her bright blue wetsuit, hair plastered to her head, grinning like a kid as she rode a small wave toward the beach where we stood cheering. Even through the phone's speaker, you could hear the joy in our voices, the love in our laughter. Jake watched the video 3 times before handing the phone back to me. She approached dying the same way she approached surfing, didn't she? Research, planning, determination. Exactly. I tucked the phone away, wondering why it had taken me 3 years to realize that sharing these memories might help instead of hurt. She spent weeks reading about Oregon's Death with Dignity Act, talking to counselors, meeting with doctors. She made sure she understood every legal requirement, every ethical consideration. The counselors, they tried to talk her out of it. They tried to make sure she was thinking clearly, that she wasn't depressed, that she had considered all her options. That's the law there. You can't just walk in and ask for help dying. There's a whole process, waiting periods, multiple doctor evaluations. Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this information. How long was the process? 3 months. 3 months of appointments and evaluations and waiting periods. 3 months of me hoping she'd change her mind. And 3 months of her becoming more certain every day that this was what she wanted. And you were with her through all of it? I nodded. Every appointment, every conversation with every doctor. I asked every question I could think of, challenged every decision, made sure they knew that I didn't want this to happen. But you didn't try to stop her. How could I? The question came out more raw than I'd intended. Jake, by the end, she couldn't eat without vomiting. She couldn't sleep more than an hour at a time because of the pain. She couldn't hug you without crying because her bones hurt so much. What kind of husband would I have been to force her to endure that, just because I couldn't bear to let her go? Jake wiped his eyes with his sleeve. I didn't know it was that bad. She never let me see. She didn't want you to remember her that way. Every day she'd put on makeup and do her hair and pretend she felt fine when you came to visit. It took everything she had, but she wanted your last memories of her to be of the woman she'd always been, not the patient she'd become. God, Dad, Jake's voice broke. All this time I thought you'd given up on her. I thought you'd taken her to Oregon to dump her in some facility and wash your hands of the whole thing. The pain in his voice nearly undid me. Jake, why would you think that? Because I found the hotel receipt in your jacket pocket, the Marriott in Portland, and I found the medical records from the Oregon clinic. But I never found any records of treatment there, no prescriptions, no follow-up appointments. I thought you'd just left her there to die alone. I closed my eyes, remembering that terrible week. We stayed at that hotel for 5 days. 5 days of walks on the beach, dinners at her favorite seafood restaurant, morning coffee on the balcony overlooking the ocean. She called it her living funeral, all the things she loved most one last time. She wasn't sick during those 5 days. She was, but she was also free somehow. Free from treatments and appointments and the pressure to keep fighting. She could just be Sarah for those last few days, not Sarah the cancer patient. Jake stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered yard. Tell me about the day she died, please. I joined him at the window, both of us looking out at the winter landscape. She woke up early that morning, around 6 a.m. She'd slept through the night for the first time in weeks. She said she knew it was the right day. Were you scared, terrified, but also relieved? I know that sounds horrible, but I was relieved that her suffering was finally going to end, and I was honored that she trusted me to be there with her. Jake turned to look at me, his eyes filled with questions. What was it like? I took a deep breath, knowing this was the hardest part to talk about. Peaceful. She sat in bed, propped up against pillows so she could see the ocean through the window. She asked me to read to her from that book of poetry she loved, the one by Mary Oliver. Wild Geese, Jake whispered. That was her favorite. I must have read that poem to her 100 times over the years. I paused, remembering the weight of that final morning. She drank the medication from a small cup, like taking bitter medicine. Then she lay back against my shoulder and we talked about you, about how proud she was of the man you were becoming, about how much joy you'd brought to her life. How long did it take? About an hour. She fell asleep first, still talking about happy memories, remembering your first day of school, your high school graduation, the day you got accepted to college. Then her breathing just slowed down and then stopped. If anyone watching this has ever been with someone during their final moments, I'd love to know what country you're tuning in from. Those moments change us in ways we never expect. Jake was crying again, but quietly now, more from relief than anguish. I wish I'd known. I wish I could have said goodbye. You did say goodbye, son. That last morning before we left for Oregon, when you hugged her extra long and told her you loved her. She knew that was goodbye, even if you didn't. Is that why she held on to me so tight? I remember thinking it was strange the way she wouldn't let go. She was memorizing the feel of you in her arms. She told me later that she wanted to carry that with her. Jake walked back to the island and picked up the recorder again. Did she leave other messages, other recordings? I shook my head. Just that one. She said if you ever forgave me, you wouldn't need anything else. And if you never forgave me, well, she hoped that recording would at least help you understand. I do understand now, but Dad... Jake looked at me with something that resembled his old admiration, tinged now with a new kind of respect. I don't know how you carried this alone for 3 years. Some days I didn't think I could. Some days I thought about telling you everything, just to stop carrying the weight of it. But she made me promise to wait until you were ready to hear it. How did she know I'd be ready today? I managed a small laugh. Your mother always said you were more like her than like me. She said when you got angry enough to cut me out of your life completely, that's when you'd be mature enough to handle the truth. Jake set the recorder down and walked around the island to where I stood. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Father and son, both of us forever changed by the woman we'd loved and lost. Then Jake stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me in the first real hug we'd shared since his mother's funeral. I'm sorry, Dad, he whispered against my shoulder. I'm sorry for hating you. I'm sorry for blaming you. I'm sorry for wasting 3 years being angry at the wrong person. I held my son tight, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. You weren't angry at the wrong person, Jake. You were grieving, and sometimes grief has to go somewhere, even when there's nowhere logical for it to land. But I hurt you. I said terrible things. You said what you needed to say to survive losing her. I understood that even when it broke my heart. We spent the next hour in a strange kind of comfortable silence, both of us emotionally drained, but somehow lighter than we'd been in years. Jake had made us both fresh coffee, and we sat in the living room near the Christmas tree, the morning sun casting everything in a golden glow that made our tear-streaked faces look almost peaceful. Dad, Jake said suddenly, breaking the quiet. In Mom's recording, she mentioned something about letters. She said there were things she wanted me to know, things she couldn't put in the recording because they were too personal. My stomach tightened. I'd been dreading this moment, knowing it would come, but hoping we could ease into it more gradually. There are letters, Jake, several of them. Where are they? I hesitated, then stood up. They're in my bedroom safe. She gave them to me with very specific instructions about when to give them to you. What kind of instructions? One for your 21st birthday, which I already gave you. Wait, Jake's brow furrowed. That birthday card with the long message inside? That was one of her letters? I nodded, watching recognition dawn on his face. She wrote it 6 months before she died, knowing she wouldn't be there for your birthday. She wanted to tell you how proud she was of the man you were becoming. I thought you wrote that. I thought... Jake's voice trailed off as he processed this revelation. I kept it in my wallet for months. I must have read it 100 times. She hoped you would. There are others, Jake. One for your college graduation, one for your wedding day, one for when you become a father, and... I took a deep breath. One for today, for the day you learned the truth about how she died. Jake stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. How many are there total? 17. She spent her last month writing them, planning for every important moment she'd miss in your life. She said she wanted to be there for you in the only way she could. 17. Jake repeated the number like it was incomprehensible. She was dying, and she spent her time writing me 17 letters? Actually, she spent her time writing you 23 letters. She gave me 6 of them to read after she died, to help me understand how to be both mother and father to you. Jake stopped pacing and stared at me. She wrote letters to help you parent me without her. Instructions, advice, warnings about what to expect from you during different stages of grief. She knew losing her would be harder on you than on me, and she wanted to make sure I didn't mess up the job of raising you alone. Can I see them? The ones she meant for you? I considered this carefully. Sarah had never explicitly said the letters to me were private, but they contained deeply personal observations about Jake's personality, his fears, his needs. Some of them, maybe. There are parts that might be too personal, too raw. Dad, after what we've talked about this morning, I think I can handle whatever she wrote. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was right. The boy who had stormed into the kitchen that morning demanding answers was gone, replaced by a young man who seemed ready to face whatever truth came next. All right, but let me get your letter for today first. I think she intended for you to read that one before the others. I went upstairs to my bedroom and opened the safe hidden behind Sarah's portrait on the dresser. Inside were the letters, each one labeled in her neat handwriting with specific instructions about when to deliver them. The one marked, "For Jake, the day he learns the truth," was thicker than most, sealed in an envelope that had yellowed slightly over the past 3 years. When I came back downstairs, Jake was sitting in Sarah's favorite chair, running his hands along the arms where her hands had rested thousands of times. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. "I used to sit in this chair when you were at work," he admitted quietly, "just to feel close to her. It still smells like her perfume sometimes." I handed him the letter and settled back onto the couch. "That's because I spray it with her perfume every few months. I couldn't bear to let that last piece of her fade away." Jake held the envelope for a long moment, tracing his name written in his mother's handwriting. "What if I'm not ready for this?" "You are, and if you're not, we'll figure it out together." He opened the envelope carefully, unfolding several pages of Sarah's distinctive blue stationery. As he began to read, I watched his face cycle through a dozen different emotions: love, sadness, surprise, confusion, and something that looked almost like awe. "She knew," he whispered after a few minutes. "She knew exactly how I'd react to finding out about Oregon. She knew I'd blame you, knew I'd be angry, knew it would take years for me to understand. What else does she say?" Jake looked up at me, tears in his eyes, but also something like wonder. "She says she's not sorry for the choice she made, but she's sorry for the burden it put on both of us. She says," he consulted the letter again, "she says she knew that keeping the secret would be the hardest thing you ever had to do, but that telling me too early would have been the cruelest thing she could do to me. She was probably right about that." "She was definitely right," Jake continued reading, occasionally laughing softly or wiping his eyes. "Dad, listen to this part. By the time Jake reads this letter, he'll be old enough to understand that love sometimes means letting go, even when every fiber of your being wants to hold on. He'll understand that your father didn't help me die because he didn't love me enough to fight for me. He helped me because he loved me enough to put my needs before his own pain." I had to look away, the words hitting me like a physical blow. Sarah had always been able to see straight to the heart of things, to understand truths that took the rest of us years to figure out. "There's more," Jake continued, his voice stronger now. "She talks about forgiveness, not just you forgiving me for hating you or me forgiving you for keeping secrets, but all of us forgiving her for leaving. She says she knows that choosing to die early meant choosing to miss parts of our lives, and she knows that hurt us both. Did she regret it?" Jake scanned further down the page. "She says she regretted the timing but not the choice. She says if she'd waited longer, she might have lost the ability to make the choice at all, and that would have been worse for everyone." We sat in silence for a few minutes while Jake finished reading. When he finally set the letter down, he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a child: complete, uncomplicated love. "Dad, she wrote something at the end that I think you need to hear." "What's that?" She says, "If my two favorite men are reading this letter together, it means they've found their way back to each other. It means Jake has learned that sometimes the people we love most are the ones who carry our heaviest burdens, and it means his father has learned that some secrets are worth keeping, even when they break your heart. I hope they know that everything I did so they could take care of each other after I was gone." I felt something break open in my chest, not in a painful way, but like a dam finally giving way to let trapped water flow free. She orchestrated all of this, didn't she? The timing, the recording, the letters. She knew exactly how it would play out. She knew us better than we knew ourselves. Jake picked up the letter again, scanning it one more time. "Dad, there's a PS here. She says there's something else in your safe, something she wanted us to find together on Christmas morning." I frowned, thinking back to the contents of the safe. "I don't remember anything else. She says to look behind the letters, taped to the back of the safe." Curious now, I went back upstairs and carefully removed all the letters from the safe. Sure enough, taped to the metal back wall was a small manila envelope I'd never noticed, labeled simply, "For both my boys." Christmas 2023. When I opened it downstairs, Jake leaning over my shoulder to see, we found a folded piece of paper and 2 small wrapped gifts. The note was brief. If you're reading this, it means you've made it through the hardest part. The gifts are small reminders of the love that brought our family together and the love that will keep you connected even now that I'm gone. Merry Christmas, my darling men. Take care of each other. Sarah. The first gift was for Jake, a small silver compass that had belonged to his great-grandfather, a merchant marine. Inside the lid, Sarah had engraved, "No matter how lost you feel, love will always guide you home." The second gift was for me, a pocket watch that had been her father's, engraved with our wedding date and the words, "Time spent loving is never time wasted." Jake held his compass up to the light, watching the needle find magnetic north. She thought of everything, didn't she? Your mother always was the planner in the family. Dad? Jake looked at me seriously. I want to read the other letters. Not all of them. I want to save some for when the occasions actually happen. But the ones you got, the ones meant to help you understand me. I think it might help us both if I knew what she told you. I nodded, understanding instinctively what he meant. We'd spent 3 years misunderstanding each other, partly because I'd been trying to follow Sarah's guidance, without Jake knowing where my decisions were coming from. For anyone who's ever received an unexpected gift that changed everything between you and someone you love, let me know what country you're watching from. Sometimes healing comes in packages we never expected. All right, I said, but let's take a break first. I think we could both use some of those blueberry pancakes I made this morning. Jake smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in months. Actually, Dad, I was thinking maybe we could make new pancakes, together. I think Mom would like that better than us eating the cold ones you made when we were still angry at each other. I looked at my son, this young man who had grown up so much in the space of a single morning, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years, hope for our future together. I think you're right, I said. I think she'd love that. Thirsty party. We cooked pancakes together for the first time in 3 years, moving around the kitchen with an ease that surprised us both. Jake measured ingredients while I heated the griddle, and we found ourselves falling into comfortable conversation about ordinary things, the weather, his job at the marketing firm, my plans to finally finish the deck repairs Sarah had been asking about for years. It wasn't until we sat down to eat that Jake brought up the letters again. Dad, I've been thinking about what Mom wrote, about the letters she left for you. I know it might be hard to share them, but I think I need to understand what she told you about me, about what to expect after she died. I set down my fork, considering his request carefully. Some of those letters are pretty brutal, Jake. Your mother didn't sugarcoat anything when it came to predicting how grief would affect you. I can handle brutal. What I can't handle is feeling like there are still secrets between us. I understood that. After years of carrying Sarah's secret alone, the thought of keeping anything else hidden from Jake felt unbearable. All right, but let me give you some context first. She wrote those letters during her last month, when the pain medication was making her very honest. She said things in those letters that she might never have said out loud. What kind of things? I went upstairs and retrieved the letters she'd written for me, arranging them on the kitchen table in the order I'd received them. The first one was to be opened the day after the funeral, the second one a month later, the third at the 6-month mark, and so on. Jake examined the dates written on each envelope. She planned a whole timeline for your grief too. She planned everything, Jake. Your mother approached death the same way she approached everything else, with lists, schedules, and contingency plans. I opened the first letter, dated 3 days after Sarah's death. This one was the hardest to read. She wrote it knowing I'd be completely destroyed, and she didn't hold back. What did she say? I cleared my throat and began reading. David, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably sitting alone in our bedroom wondering how you're going to survive the next 5 minutes, let alone the rest of your life. I know you. I know you're blaming yourself for not fighting harder to keep me alive. I know you're second-guessing every decision we made together. Stop. Jake leaned forward, listening intently. The next few weeks are going to be hell, I continued. You're going to want to hide from everyone, especially Jake. You're going to want to drink too much and sleep too little and pretend this never happened. Don't. Jake needs you to be present even when being present feels impossible. He's going to be angry and confused, and he's going to lash out at the person closest to him, which is you. Let him. Don't take it personally. His anger isn't really about you. God, she was right about that, Jake said quietly. I was so angry and I didn't even know why. She predicted all of it. Listen to this part. Jake is going to blame you for things that aren't your fault, and he's going to test your love for him in ways that will break your heart. He'll stay out too late, skip meals, fail classes, anything to see if you'll abandon him like he thinks I did. Don't. Keep showing up even when he pushes you away, especially when he pushes you away. Jake's face had gone pale. I did all of that. The drinking, the skipping work, the staying out until 3 a.m. just to see if you'd wait up for me. You were testing whether I'd leave too. Sarah knew you would. I opened the second letter, dated a month after the funeral. By now, Jake will have started the really destructive behavior. He'll be drinking too much, maybe experimenting with things that scare you. He'll bring home people you don't like and make choices that seem designed to hurt himself. This is normal. This is grief. Don't try to control it. You'll only push him further away. Just be there when he crashes, because he will crash. Did I crash? I looked at my son, remembering that terrible night 6 weeks after Sarah's funeral, when he'd come home drunk and sobbing, finally breaking down in my arms. Do you remember the night you came home from that party at Kevin's house? The night I threw up in the kitchen sink and cried for 2 hours. That night, your mother predicted it almost exactly. She even told me what to say to you. What did she tell you to say? I smiled, remembering Sarah's precise instructions. She said to tell you that being angry at the world was okay. Being angry at me was okay, but being angry at yourself wasn't allowed. She said to remind you that she didn't leave because she didn't love you enough to stay. She left because she loved you too much to make you watch her suffer. Jake's eyes filled with tears. You said exactly that. I remember thinking it sounded like something she would say, but I thought you were just trying to make me feel better. I was reading from her script, Jake. She wrote out those exact words because she knew you'd need to hear them in her voice, not mine. I opened the third letter, dated 6 months after the funeral. This one was about the anger phase. Jake's grief is going to turn into rage, and that rage is going to need a target. Unfortunately, you're the most convenient target. He's going to say things that cut you to the bone. He's going to accuse you of not loving me enough, of giving up on me, of being relieved that I'm gone. None of it will be true, but all of it will feel true to him in the moment. I said all of those things, Jake whispered. I said you were probably happy she was gone because you didn't have to take care of her anymore. I remember. How did you not hate me for saying that? I showed him the next paragraph of Sarah's letter. When Jake says horrible things to you, and he will, remember that he's not really talking to you. He's talking to the universe that took his mother away. He's talking to the disease that stole our time together. He's talking to death itself. You just happen to be standing in the line of fire. Jake pushed back from the table and walked to the window, his shoulders shaking. She understood me better than I understood myself. She spent 22 years studying you, Jake. She knew your heart better than anyone. I opened the fourth letter, written for the 1-year anniversary. This one was about hope. By now, you and Jake have probably settled into a routine of polite distance. You're both afraid to be happy, because it feels like betraying my memory. You're both afraid to talk about me because it hurts too much. This is the most dangerous time. This is when you could lose each other permanently if you don't push through the fear. We did get distant around that time, Jake said, still looking out the window. I remember thinking that if we didn't talk about her, maybe it would hurt less. She predicted that too. She said, Jake will want to pretend I never existed because remembering hurts too much. Don't let him. Tell him stories about me. Share memories even when they make you both cry. The pain of remembering is temporary, but the pain of forgetting lasts forever. I opened the fifth letter, dated 18 months after Sarah's death. This one was about the investigation phase. She wrote, Jake is going to start asking questions about my death. He's going to want details about my treatment, my doctors, my final days. He's probably going to go through my medical records if he can find them. When this happens, don't panic. This is healthy. This is him trying to understand what happened to his world. Jake turned from the window. That's when I found the Oregon receipts and started putting together a story that wasn't true. She predicted that too, didn't she? I nodded and opened the sixth and final letter, dated 2.5 years after Sarah's death. If Jake is still angry at this point, if he's still blaming you for my death, it means he's found evidence of Oregon but doesn't understand what it means. This is the time to tell him everything. Give him the recording I made for him. Let him read this letter I wrote for him. Help him understand that love sometimes looks like letting go. The timing was perfect, Jake said, returning to the table. If you'd told me earlier, I wouldn't have been ready to hear it. Your mother knew that. She knew you needed to work through your own grief before you could understand ours. Jake picked up one of the letters, examining his mother's handwriting. Did she write anything about herself? About how she felt about leaving us? I hesitated, then opened a folded piece of paper that had been tucked inside the final letter. She wrote this for both of us to read, but only after we'd worked through everything else. I spread the paper on the table between us. It was shorter than the others, written in Sarah's increasingly shaky handwriting from her final days. My dearest David and Jake, if you're reading this together, it means you've found your way back to each other. It means the plan worked. I need you both to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, but staying would have been harder. Staying would have meant asking you to watch me disappear piece by piece. Staying would have meant my final gift to you would be trauma instead of love. Jake reached across the table and took my hand as I continued reading. I chose to leave while I could still tell you I loved you. I chose to leave while you could still remember me as myself. I chose to leave while I was still your wife and mother, not just a patient you were caring for. This was not giving up. This was my final act of love for both of you. If you've ever had to make an impossible choice to protect someone you love, I'd love to know what corner of the world you're listening from. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the most loving ones. I folded the letter carefully, my hands trembling slightly. There's one more thing, Jake, something she made me promise to tell you only after you'd read all of this. What? She wasn't really planning to tell you about Oregon at all. She was going to take that secret to her grave. But in her final week, she realized that keeping it secret might eventually destroy our relationship. So she changed her mind. She recorded that message for you and wrote all these letters because she realized that the truth, painful as it was, would ultimately bring us closer together than any lie ever could. Jake was quiet for a long time, processing everything he'd learned. Finally, he looked up at me with eyes that held a peace I hadn't seen since before his mother got sick. Dad, I think I understand now why you couldn't tell me before, and I think I understand why she made you wait. But most importantly, I understand that everything you both did, you did because you loved me. More than you'll ever know. Jake stood up and walked around the table to hug me again. I think it's time we stopped carrying her secrets and started sharing her memory instead. The afternoon sun was slanting through our living room windows when Jake and I finally moved away from the kitchen table, both of us emotionally drained, but somehow energized at the same time. We'd spent hours reading through Sarah's letters, sharing memories, and slowly rebuilding the bridge between us that grief had nearly destroyed. Dad, Jake said as we settled back in the living room, I keep thinking about what Mom wrote in that last letter, about how she wanted us to share her memory instead of carrying her secrets. I nodded, understanding what he was getting at. We've spent 3 years tiptoeing around her absence instead of celebrating her presence. Exactly. And I think that's what she was trying to prevent with all those letters. She didn't want us to get stuck in grief. She wanted us to find a way to keep her with us. I looked around our living room, really seeing it for the first time in months. Sarah's books still lined the shelves. Her favorite throw blanket was still draped over her chair. Her collection of vintage teacups still filled the display cabinet. But instead of feeling like a shrine to someone gone, it suddenly felt like a celebration of someone deeply loved. She's everywhere, isn't she? Jake said, following my gaze. In this house, in the way we make coffee, in the way you still buy those expensive vanilla candles she loved, even though you think they're a waste of money. I laughed, surprising myself. 3 years later, and I still can't walk past them in the store without putting one in my cart. And you still make her pancake recipe every Sunday morning, even though you're the only one eating them. How did you know that? Jake smiled sheepishly. I drive by sometimes on Sunday mornings on my way to the gym. I can smell them from the street. It always made me so sad, thinking about you eating breakfast alone. I wasn't alone, I said quietly. I was having breakfast with your mother. Every Sunday morning I'd set 2 plates, make her coffee the way she liked it, and tell her about my week. It probably sounds crazy, but it doesn't sound crazy at all. Jake's voice was thick with emotion. It sounds like love. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us processing how much we'd misunderstood about each other's grief. I'd thought Jake's absence meant he didn't care about preserving Sarah's memory. He'd thought my Sunday morning rituals meant I was living in the past instead of moving forward. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything? Do you think Mom would be disappointed in how we've handled the last 3 years? All the fighting, all the time we wasted being angry at each other? I considered the question carefully, thinking about the woman who had loved us both so fiercely. I think your mother would understand that grief makes people do things they normally wouldn't do, but I also think she'd be proud of us for finding our way back to each other, even though it took us so long, especially because it took us so long. Easy forgiveness isn't really forgiveness at all. It's just politeness. What we've done today, working through the hard truths, facing the painful reality of her death, choosing to trust each other again, that's the real thing. Jake stood up and walked to the mantel where several framed photos of Sarah sat among our Christmas decorations. He picked up one from our last family vacation, the three of us on a beach in Maine, Sarah laughing as Jake tried to teach her to skip stones. "I haven't looked at these pictures in 2 years," he admitted. "It hurt too much. And now? Now it hurts, but in a different way. Like the hurt has love mixed into it instead of just anger." I joined him at the mantel looking at the photo he held. That was a good day. She was so determined to master stone skipping that we stayed on that beach until sunset. "She never did figure it out," Jake said with a soft laugh. "Her stones just plopped into the water every time. But she kept trying. That was your mother. Once she set her mind to something, she wouldn't give up. Like learning to surf, like fighting cancer for as long as she could, like making sure we'd be okay without her." I picked up another photo. Sarah at Jake's high school graduation, beaming with pride as he walked across the stage. "You know what I miss most about her?" "What?" "The way she could find something to be excited about in the most ordinary moments. Remember how she'd get so thrilled about the first snow of winter, or finding a good parking spot at the grocery store, or when her favorite song came on the radio?" Jake's face lit up with recognition. "She'd do that little dance in the kitchen when Dancing Queen came on. Even when she was sick, even when she could barely stand up, she'd still do those little shoulder moves." "I haven't listened to that song since she died," I admitted. "I couldn't bear it." "Neither have I." Jake set down the photo and turned to face me. "Dad, I have an idea. What if we tried to do Christmas the way Mom would have wanted? Not pretending she's not gone, but including her somehow?" "What do you mean?" "Well, she always said Christmas was about gratitude and connection, right? About appreciating the people you love while you have them. What if instead of avoiding her memory today, we celebrated it?" I felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. "What did you have in mind?" "First, I think we should play her favorite Christmas music, all of it, even the cheesy stuff that used to make us groan." I laughed, remembering Sarah's devotion to obscure Christmas albums and her inexplicable love for 1980s holiday pop songs. "Your mother had terrible taste in Christmas music, the worst, but she loved it. And she'd want us to remember that loving something doesn't require it to be perfect." Jake walked to the old stereo system where Sarah's CD collection still sat untouched. He selected a disc I recognized immediately, a compilation of Christmas songs by various artists that Sarah had played every year, despite our protests. The opening notes of Last Christmas filled the room, and for a moment, the familiarity of it took my breath away. But instead of the crushing sadness I'd expected, I felt something lighter, a bittersweet joy mixed with deep love. "She's probably laughing at us right now," Jake said, swaying slightly to the music, "thinking about how we used to complain about her musical taste, and now we're voluntarily listening to it. She always said we'd miss her terrible Christmas music someday. She was right about that too." The song changed to Wonderful Christmas Time by Paul McCartney, another of Sarah's inexplicable favorites. Without thinking, I started humming along. Jake noticed and grinned. "Dad, when's the last time you sang along to Christmas music?" I had to think about it. "Probably 3 years ago. The last Christmas we had with your mother. She always said you had a good voice even though you never believed her. Your mother was biased. Maybe, but she was also right about most things." Jake paused, then looked at me seriously. "Dad, would you be willing to try something that might sound weird? After the morning we've had, I think I'm ready for weird. What if we cooked Christmas dinner together? Not just any Christmas dinner, but Mom's Christmas dinner. Her recipes, her traditions, her way of doing everything. And while we cook, we could talk to her. Tell her about the last 3 years, about what we've learned, about how much we miss her." The suggestion should have seemed morbid or unhealthy, but instead it felt exactly right. She'd love that. Your mother always said the kitchen was the heart of Christmas. And she'd want us to mess up her recipes and argue about whether we're doing it right, just like we used to when she was here supervising. I found myself smiling at the memory. She never trusted us to follow her recipes exactly. She'd hover over our shoulders, adjusting seasoning and correcting our technique, even though half the time we were doing exactly what she'd told us to do 5 minutes earlier. That's because she was convinced we'd somehow forget everything the moment she turned her back. Jake was already heading toward the kitchen, energized by the plan. "Do you still have her recipe box?" "Of course, it's exactly where she left it." I retrieved the small wooden box from its place of honor on the kitchen counter. Sarah's handwriting covered dozens of index cards, each one stained and worn from years of use. Her Christmas ham recipe, her famous stuffing, her secret ingredient for the perfect gravy, all of it preserved in her careful script. "Should we start with the ham?" Jake asked, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. That always took the longest. "Your mother would be furious if we didn't start with the ham." She had very strong opinions about timing. As we began to work, following Sarah's detailed instructions, something magical happened. The kitchen filled not just with the familiar smells of Christmas dinner, but with stories and laughter, and the kind of easy conversation we hadn't shared in years. Jake told me about his job, about the girl he'd been seeing but hadn't mentioned because he wasn't sure we were talking anymore. I told him about my plans to maybe start dating again, something I'd been afraid to bring up because I thought it would hurt him. "Dad," Jake said as he scored the ham according to Sarah's precise diagram, "I want you to know that if you meet someone who makes you happy, I'd be okay with that. More than okay, Mum wouldn't want you to be alone forever." "Really? Really?" She told me once when she first got sick that she hoped if anything happened to her, you'd find someone else to love. She said loving her had made you a better man, and some other woman deserved to benefit from that. I had to stop stirring the gravy for a moment, overwhelmed by the generosity of that sentiment. Your mother was extraordinary. She was. And Dad. I think part of honoring her memory means not being afraid to be happy again. For those of you watching who have ever had to learn how to be happy again after losing someone precious, tell me what country you're joining us from. Sometimes healing means giving ourselves permission to feel joy alongside the grief. As the afternoon wore on and Christmas dinner came together in our kitchen, I realized that Jake was right. Sarah would want us to find happiness again, not happiness that erased her memory, but happiness that included her love as part of its foundation. "You know what?" I said as we sat down to eat the meal we'd prepared together. "I think this might be the best Christmas we've had since your mother died." Jake raised his glass of wine in a toast. "To Mom, for planning the perfect Christmas morning, even 3 years after the fact." "To your mother," I agreed, clinking my glass against his. "And to new traditions that honor old love." Outside, snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance church bells were ringing. But inside our warm kitchen, eating a meal prepared with love and seasoned with memories, it felt like Sarah was right there with us, not as a ghost we were afraid to disturb, but as the foundation of love upon which we were building our future together.